So welcome to the workshop on stress and burnout that we are running today. I've been running this for a lot of my clients who are companies because I think that at the moment we're kind of halfway through the year and we've had lots of bank holidays. People are starting to be able to go away on holiday. And so we're finding ourselves being able to, take some time off of work. But the challenge of that is that we spend a lot of time before going away trying to cram the work that we would be doing in that time into our time at work. And when we come back, we kind of find that our work we come back to an inbox full of emails, and that can feel quite overwhelming. So it feels like a really relevant topic for right now. So what we're going to be going through today is we'll go through the stages of burnout. We will look at stress versus stressors, and then we'll also look at responding to burnout. But first, I think it's really important to check in with how we're feeling. If we're going to talk about mental health, we're going to talk about our well-being, it's important for us to actually think about how we're feeling. When I was training as a counsellor, one of the things that we had to do was when we would, enter the lecture hall, is we'd sit around in a circle and we would have to say exactly how it was that we were feeling. And that was really overwhelming for many reasons. But, one of the main things was that we were used to culturally saying to someone, "How are you feeling?" "Yep, I'm fine." "How are you?" "Yep, all good." And that is just so surface level. And when we're talking about counselling, or we're talking about really connecting with our mental health and having a positive impact on our mental health, we have to focus on how we're feeling. We have to start being able to use labels to identify what it is that we are feeling. This can be really helpful because sometimes we will label ourselves as feeling angry, when actually we're feeling maybe lonely or let down. And so by being able to label the feeling, it means that we can truly start to think about how we are and what we can do with that feeling. And what we do with being angry versus what we do with being lonely are two very different things. And so this on the left hand side that you'll see here is something called the feeling wheel. And so what this can do is, and what a lot of clients do, is they'll screenshot this and have this on their phone, or maybe put it somewhere in their room as something to help them identify and label what there is they're feeling. So I invite you to just spend a few moments looking at this and picking out one or two feelings that maybe summarize what it is that you're feeling today. And it'd be interesting to reflect on what it is that you would have said before looking at this feeling wheel as well. So what is burnout? So burnout is a widely used term. We use it a lot these days. And I think that when actually we're talking about burnout, it's worthwhile thinking about the World Health Organization's definition, which says that burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. They specifically align it to being in the workplace. So it's something that they feel or they have labelled as a feeling in the workplace, but it can happen, in other areas of our lives as well. And it occurs when we're feeling overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and like we're unable to meet constant demands. So there's something about how long we're feeling this immense amount of stress for. Sorry, I just had something come up, but there we go, it's gone now. So just minimize that. You may have seen this curve before. This is called the stress curve. And what it does is it tells us that, as you can see on the bottom line, this is our stress level, and over time it increases. And on the left-hand side, we have performance. And so the suggestion from the stress curve is that as our stress levels increase, our performance can increase until we reach peak performance. So that means that ultimately we need a certain level of stress in order for us to perform, in order for us to be able to get out of bed in the morning. However, once we've reached peak performance, if that stress continues to increase, our performance begins to drop. And we start to feel fatigued, we feel exhausted, we feel panic and anxiety and anger before reaching burnout and breakdown. So this curve tells us that this burnout and breakdown, it doesn't happen immediately. It's something that happens over time. And it's worth kind of thinking of this as too much for too long. So what does burnout look like? Well, many different things. It can look different on all of us, but here are some words that are really associated with burnout. So that can be being tired, using unhealthy coping mechanisms. So, for example, it might be turning to going on our phones, it might be turning to food, it might be turning to drugs and alcohol. It can look like frequent illnesses. Our immune system starts to really get impacted when all of our energy is going into fight or flight. We don't have the reserves to be able to support ourselves from a well-being point of view. And so we can find ourselves getting ill a lot. We can be left feeling really isolated, and that can in turn make us withdraw. We may feel helpless, we can lose motivation, we may be procrastinating, we may have changes in our appetites that could look like being eating more or eating less. We might experience muscle pain. This is something that I get when I'm feeling burnt out, and that's a real sign that I'm kind of heading towards burnout. So I get pain in the kind of top of my shoulder, in my neck, and all the way down into my hand. And it's because we're tensing, or I'm tensing so much without even really realizing. So this, muscle pain can be, how we're feeling in our body can be a significant way of identifying how we're feeling mentally. And we may find we have changed in our sleeping habits as well. So it may be that we're sleeping more, or that we're struggling to sleep. And so when we're experiencing burnout, it's really easy to fall into kind of all or nothing thinking. And so when we're noticing that we're feeling burnt out, we may completely put our focus onto either the stress that we're experiencing or the stressor, so the thing that is causing the stress. And in reality, it's both of these things. Both of those things are at play. And, then it's worth asking, what's the difference between the stress and stressor? Well, one is an internal experience, and that's the stress. So that's something that you feel internally. Whereas the other, the stressor, that's something that's happening in the external world that's causing that stress. So if we want to better understand our relationship with burnout, we need to be able to better understand both of these things. So when we're looking at the stressor, we need to kind of directly look at what is causing the stress and get really curious about this. We need to think about why. It can help to speak to someone else in order to be able to externalize it, or maybe just grabbing a pen and a paper will help you do that. And it can feel quite overwhelming when we have all of those thoughts in our mind. So being able to externalize it in that way can be really helpful. But I also have a tool that I find quite helpful in these moments, and I use with clients, and that is the 5 whys, which always makes me think of 5 guys, and then makes me want to order a burger. But this one is the 5 whys. And the 5 whys is pretty simple. It's just where you ask yourself why 5 times. So, for example, if I'm thinking that I'm stressed and I ask myself, why? Why am I stressed? Or it might be another emotion from the feeling wheel. And I might think, well, I've missed an important deadline. Why? Because I spent the last week unable to focus. Why? I had so many tasks and I was in and out of meetings. Why? I took on a new project that was out of my comfort zone. Why? Because it's important to me that people see me as capable and good at my job. So when we have that understanding of these 5 whys, we can start to think about what we want to do about it. That maybe this stressor that we're experiencing, maybe us pushing ourselves too far out of our comfort zone, or actually it might help us realign and focus on the goal and help us understand why we are doing this. So it's worth thinking right now, maybe you want to pause this video, but to think about what is it that you feel is causing you stress and get curious about it. And do that by doing this task. So going through and asking yourself why 5 times. I would give yourself about sort of 7 to 10 minutes to do this, to kind of really think quite deeply about it. And then reflect. on how that felt. Is that, something that felt helpful to you? Is this a useful tool that maybe you'd want to use in the future? And then once you've done that, we need to look at the stress. So it's time to think about, the stress that we are experiencing internally. And we can deal with stress in a way that releases it. So completes what we call the stress cycle. And ultimately that can help us and prevent us from burning out. We can't control every external stressor that comes our way. And the goal in life isn't to live in a constant state of balance or of peace and calm. We might find ourselves, if we were doing that, to be at the sort of unmotivated phase of the stress curve, that maybe we wouldn't have enough stress to keep us going and keep us motivated. So the goal, in actual fact, is for us to learn how to move through the stress, how to respond to stress in a different way, so that we're ready for when the next stressor inevitably comes. And problems get stuck. When problems get stuck, that's when we experience burnout. So if you take the example of sitting in traffic on your way home, you don't feel instantly peaceful when you come through the door. Your body is still in the middle of the stress response. So even though you've dealt with the stressor of the traffic, your body still needs to deal with the stress itself by completing the stress response cycle. So when we encounter stresses, the body's stress response is triggered, and a series of physiological changes take place to allow us to fly, fight, freeze, or fawn. Our body is preparing to do these things, and instead we're kind of just standing still. So whilst it would be impractical to eliminate all stress in our life, it is important that we deal with this stress that we're experiencing. And that's what's known as stress management. So when I talk about the stress cycle, I like to go back to basics. When my dog has gone through something that is uncomfortable, maybe she is scared of something, she's seen, her own shadow maybe, she will shake, a bit like this dog on the left here, and just kind of shake off all of the stress that she's experiencing in her body, physiological stress. And you can see this rabbit doing it on the right-hand side as well, that this is actually something that animals do, out in the wild. Their bodies are filled with a stress response to respond to something that is scary. Their body then gets prepared to respond by fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And then when the threat has left, they release the threat's response. They complete the stress cycle by shaking it out. And so Taylor Swift is in here as well, because in some ways we need to learn to channel this. You need to sort of connect with these difficult, these things that these animals do in order to complete the stress cycle. And so movement is a great way of doing that. And that can be exercise in the sense of going for a run, but it can also just be, doing some jumping jacks or stomping your feet, just creating some energy and some movement in your body to help complete that stress cycle so that we don't get stuck in it. And there are a number of other ways that we can complete the stress cycle other than just shaking. So some ways that we can do that are the physical activity that I've just mentioned. Creativity is a great way of kind of being mindful, starting to ground yourself in the present moment. If you're someone who overthinks or is thinking in the future, being creative is a way to kind of ground yourself. Laughing is also a great way of sort of managing with stress, especially if you can laugh with someone. It's a way that we can kind of release all of the emotions that we're feeling inside. If you're like me, sometimes what I do is I'll be laughing and then kind of go into crying. It's almost like that's what my body needs in that moment. And there's a saying that is, emotions are like tunnels. If you go all the way through them, then you will see the light at the end. And I think that laughter helps with that a lot. Crying is another one. So crying is for everybody, men, women, children, adults. Babies cry because it's good for them. It's a natural thing for us to do. And yet we're told often in our society that we shouldn't be crying, and that crying, I think when we were young, a lot of us were told, don't worry about it, everything will be okay. But actually, crying is one of our body's mechanisms of releasing stress, and it's also a form of self-soothing. So actually, it's really helpful for our bodies to be able to cry. And physical attention. So you don't have to have a romantic partner to give someone a hug, or to even just be able to hug yourself and give yourself that contact. That can be something that we might do intuitively, but that can feel really like we're providing ourselves with a safe place. Or if you have a pet, spending some time with them, because being able to have that physical attention helps to release, all of the oxytocin and bonding and the hormones that allow us to feel safe, and remove the sense of danger that our body is experiencing. So as our hormones shift, our heart rate begins to slow and our body begins to feel safe again. And the final one that I've put here, although there are many others, is breathing. So there's so many different techniques in terms of breathing out there. So it's worth really sort of doing a research, finding the way that feels easiest for you. But the main thing that I tend to remember is just that we should try to have our out breath to be longer than our in breath, because this really helps to regulate our nervous system. This tells our body that we are safe. So that's kind of quite an important one to remember. But another thing that you can try is just popping your hands onto your stomach and taking a big deep breath in and allowing your breath to flow right down to your stomach. And that's what we call diaphragmatic breathing. And it's rather than us kind of having this shallow breath that's up here, which is where we tend to breathe from, it's actually just taking a moment to sort of allow it to go all the way down and then breathing out. But just trying to remember to have that in breath, that out breath to be longer than the in breath. And it's worth noting here that obviously prevention is better than cure. So if you are kind of further along that stress curve, these things may not all be helpful for you. It may be that actually you're at the point that I need to speak to someone about these things, and help to have some individual support. And so the trick I often think is about recognizing where we are on the stress curve and starting to do these things, or the things that help us earlier on, before we come to sort of crisis point. It's worth noting that we can speak to people and speak to a counselor or a life coach before we hit burnout phase. It's not always about hitting crisis. Lots of people come to therapy because actually they want to maintain their well-being. So whether it's therapy, whether it's getting involved in physical activity, doing mindfulness, whatever it is, just thinking about how can I help prevent myself from reaching that really difficult crisis point for me. So in summary, we've got here the feeling wheel. So that's kind of, if you want to Google it and have that on your phone screenshotted somewhere, that's what it's called. But it's there because it's important for us to be talking about how we're feeling, and not just to others, but also to ourselves, so that we can label those feelings to ourselves and start to understand them better and just get really curious about them. Get curious about where you might be in the stress cycle to be able to understand what phase of burnout you might be coming to, and what could you do to kind of step one step back if you're kind of in that unhealthy phase of the stress cycle. What could you do to help you reach that peak performance area? What one change could you make? And then the final image we've got here is just of the shaking dog. So remembering that the stress is held in our body, and that we often have to relearn to complete that stress cycle. And that is a great way of completing the stress cycle. Just allowing all of the adrenaline that we experience when we may receive an email from someone. Our body may be thinking that we're in the forest and there's a tiger or a bear that we've just seen. Our body doesn't know that it's just an email and that actually we are safe. And so we have to communicate to our body, it's okay, let me flush out these stress hormones, and communicate that we are okay, we're safe. So that is all that we've got for today. If you have any questions about any of this, just pop a comment into the comments bit on the online studio, or send me a direct message. And if you've got a specific topic that you would like to be covered in one of these workshops, then just drop me a message and we can get that done for you as well. Okay, I shall speak to you soon. Bye.